Now we will come to the barium meal study of the stomach. A chronic gastric ulcer. In this barium study of the stomach, note the characteristic ulcer nick projecting from the lesser curvature. This profile view is absolutely diagnostic of a chronic and benign gastric ulcer. Note that the ulcer nick is projecting beyond the border of the stomach. This is the radiological sign that spells a benign ulcer. In this X-ray, we have an end-on view of a chronic gastric ulcer. Here we see the characteristic ulcer nick surrounded by a radiolucent halo due to mucosal edema. This is another chronic gastric ulcer showing an end-on view of the nick surrounded by a radiolucent halo, and beyond it we see folds radiating towards the ulcer. In profile view, the ulcer nick projects beyond the gastric margin. When a gastric ulcer is detected on barium meal examination, it is important to look for signs of malignancy in it, as gastric ulcers tend to be malignant. Now note this ulcer in a profile view. The ulcer nick lies within the projected lesser curvature of the stomach. This is a characteristic sign of malignancy. The red arrow shows abrupt cessation of normal gastric mucosa where the growth begins, and the ulcer is located on the top of the growth, so it does not project beyond the curvature of the stomach. Also note the absence of folds around the site of pathology due to infiltration of the surrounding mucosa. Now let us have a comparison. Note that the benign ulcer projects beyond the lesser curvature, while the malignant ulcer on the left is inside the projected line of lesser curvature. The benign ulcer projects beyond the stomach margin, while the malignant ulcer lies within it. A long-standing gastric ulcer on lesser curvature with cicatrization may cause narrowing of the gastric lumen, and in an extreme case, it narrows down to divide the stomach in the shape of an hourglass. This is an hourglass, and note the hourglass stomach with a narrow center, a pouch above and a pouch below. So the radiological features of a chronic gastric ulcer are an ulcer nick. In profile view, the ulcer nick lies outside the stomach border. In frontal view, the nick is surrounded by a radiolucent halo and radiating folds. Malignant growths in the stomach. Here we see a prepyloric growth. A proliferative growth is seen on barium meal as a radiolucent shadow with irregular borders projecting into the barium-filled lumen of the stomach. Note the arrows pointing to the irregular narrowing of the lumen in the distal stomach. Since the mucosa is destroyed, the borders are not smooth, they are irregular. This is another X-ray showing a growth on the greater curvature. The arrow points to an irregular radiolucent shadow projecting into the lumen of the stomach. Also note the loss of normal mucosal folds and loss of distensibility, which are the other features which suggest the presence of a malignant growth. This barium meal X-ray shows a growth on the greater curvature in the prepyloric region. Note the irregular long narrowing of the distal end of the stomach. The arrows point to an irregular radiolucent projection of the growth into the barium-filled lumen. Also note the shouldering. In this X-ray, focus the attention on the area shown by the arrows. The mucosal fold pattern is disturbed and the portion is not distended. The area failed to distend on repeated screenings during the examination. Loss of mucosal folds and non-distensibility are features suggestive of a malignant growth. So the radiological features of a malignant growth in the stomach are a radiolucent projection of the growth casting a negative shadow in the barium-filled stomach, loss of mucosal folds and loss of distensibility. And the features of a malignant ulcer are an ulcer nick which lies within the projected line of the stomach border and the radiolucent projection of the growth into the barium-filled lumen. A chronic duodenal ulcer. A chronic duodenal ulcer can be diagnosed with fair accuracy on studying the duodenal cap, first when it is distended with barium and later after it is partially empty. Note this ulcer crater which has retained barium in its base. This is an end-on view of the ulcer nick in the duodenum. Note the halo of radiolucency around it due to edematous raised mucosa. A persistent speck of barium even after emptying of the duodenum is very suggestive of a chronic duodenal ulcer. This is a typical end-on view of an ulcer nick. In this X-ray, a larger ulcer nick is seen. The upper X-ray shows ulcer nick in the duodenum surrounded by a radiolucent halo of mucosal edema. The close-up view shows the radiolucent halo very clearly. There is no significant deformity of the duodenal cap. This is another duodenal ulcer in frontal view. The ulcer nick is clearly seen surrounded by a halo and a few radiating folds. Now, in a lateral view, the ulcer nick is seen projecting beyond the duodenal margin on the anterior wall of the duodenum. So this is an anterior wall duodenal ulcer. The next X-ray shows a lateral view of an ulcer nick on the posterior wall of the duodenum. The characteristic nick projecting outside the duodenal margin is seen on the posterior wall. This is a posterior wall duodenal ulcer. Now this is a comparison showing a posterior wall ulcer and an anterior wall ulcer in lateral view. The anterior wall ulcer is on the left and posterior wall ulcer is to the right in the right oblique and lateral views. Now this is an advanced stage of the disease where the duodenal cap is deformed and non-distensible. In this second case also, the smooth triangular shape of the normal duodenal cap is not seen. It is deformed and it does not distend. So the radiological features of a chronic duodenal ulcer are an ulcer nick seen as a persistent speck of barium which extends outside the wall in lateral view and in end-on view is surrounded by a radiolucent halo and radiating folds. In long-standing cases, the duodenal cap is deformed and non-distensible. Congenital or infantile hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. The infantile hypertrophic pyloric stenosis is usually diagnosed clinically and a confirmation may be done on radiography. Note the abrupt cutoff of barium at the pylorus with a tiny curved point like a bird's beak. This is the characteristic appearance of a congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. The beak may be followed by a thin layer of barium in the pyloric canal. Note also the arrows pointing to the smooth indentation of the barium-filled antrum on either sides produced by the hypertrophied pyloric muscle. These are the radiological features of infantile hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. Barium meal for the right iliac fossa to study the cecum and the appendix. Chronic appendicitis. A barium meal or even a barium enema may be utilized to study the appendix. Persistent non-filling of the appendix is very suggestive of chronic appendicitis, though not diagnostic. Note this appendix. It has a thin and irregular lumen. Multiple filling defects due to ficolites and irregular mucosal outline are both suggestive of chronic appendicitis. This appendix is long and has a very narrow and irregular lumen. Note the length of the appendix shown by the arrows and study its lumen. Irregularity and narrowing of the lumen is also suggestive of chronic appendicitis. This appendix shows multiple filling defects due to ficolites. Presence of ficolites is also considered very suggestive of appendicular pathology. Note the multiple filling defects, though there is no narrowing of the lumen. This is another appendix showing an acute curvature suggesting adhesions and an irregular lumen suggesting mucosal inflammation. This is an appearance of chronic appendicitis. So the radiological features of appendicitis on barium meal are irregularity and narrowing of the lumen of the appendix, presence of fecoliths, and non-visualization, that is non-filling of the appendix. In acute appendicitis, a barium meal would not be done, but on plain X-ray, presence of a radio-opaque fecolith, gas in the lumen of the appendix, localized paralytic ileus, and presence of a soft tissue shadow of a mass due to appendicular abscess are suggestive of acute appendicitis in plain X-ray. Ileocecal tuberculosis is a common cause of pain and lump in the right iliac fossa and often an intestinal obstruction. This X-ray shows a contracted conical cecum which is pulled up due to fibrosis of the mesocolon to a much higher level from its normal position indicated by the red star. The terminal ileum is narrowed, termed as the Sterlin sign, and the ileum proximal to this narrowed segment is dilated. Note in the close-up picture the badly contracted and pulled up cecum, spastic long narrow segment of the terminal ileum, and dilated ileum proximal to it. This is the classical picture of ileocecal tuberculosis on barium meal. In this X-ray, the cecum shown by the white arrow is conical and pulled up. As a result, the ileocecal angle has become obtuse. The terminal ileum shows a long narrow segment, that is Sterlin sign, shown by the red arrow, and proximal to it the ileum is dilated. In the close-up view, the white arrow points to the spastic terminal ileum, that is Sterlin sign, and in addition there are two more strictures of the ileum with dilated segments. Intestinal tuberculous ulcers always heal with fibrosis and produce strictures. Multiple ileal strictures is another feature of intestinal tuberculosis. In this X-ray, the barium is not seen as a bolus but is broken up and gives a feathery appearance. This is also considered by some radiologists as suggestive of intestinal tuberculosis. In this X-ray, the arrow points to a contracted cecum which is pulled up almost up to the hepatic flexure. The terminal ileum shows a long, narrow, spastic segment. Proximal to it, the ileum is dilated. The transverse and descending colon are normal. This is ileocecal tuberculosis. So the features of ileocecal tuberculosis are a conical and contracted cecum which is pulled upwards and lies at a higher level, and spastic narrowing of terminal ileum, that is Sterlin sign, with dilatation of ileum proximal to the narrowed segment. In addition, there may be strictures in the rest of the ileum. Roundworms in ileum. This X-ray shows a single roundworm in the small intestine. In a close view, note that it is the gut of the roundworm that is lined by the barium, while its body casts a negative shadow. But sometimes large bunches of roundworms may be seen during a barium meal examination. In this X-ray, note the faint shadows of roundworms lined by barium filling the bowel loops. In close-up view, some of the radiolucent shadows are typically elongated in the shape of the roundworms. This X-ray shows filling defects caused by roundworms in the cecum. Note the knobby radiolucent shadows. In another view, the terminal ileum, shown by the red arrow, is seen to be loaded with a large number of roundworms. Note the typical filling defects caused by roundworms in terminal ileum. One may not do a barium meal study in presence of acute roundworm obstruction. but detection of roundworms in the intestines during a routine barium meal study is very common. Barium enema is the contrast study of the colon after filling it with barium as an enema. Ulcerative colitis. Note the appearance of this colon. There is loss of hostrations. The colon borders show ulcer nicks and the colon is less distensible than normal. This is the characteristic appearance of ulcerative colitis. In a close-up view, the transverse colon shows tiny outpouchings or ulcer nicks and there are no hostrations. The mucosal edema and undermining are evident on the descending colon shown by the red arrow. The ascending colon shows normal structure and normal hostrations. The changes of ulcerative colitis always start in the rectum, sigmoid and descending colon and later progress to the right side. In early stage, the colonic mucosa shows multiple ulcerations seen as rough or granular mucosal pattern with large ulcers seen as tiny outpouchings of barium from the colon margin. Note the rough and granular mucosa in this barium enema and of course the loss of hostrations from sigmoid colon to the hepatic flexure. Later, pseudopolyposis may develop with multiple small filling defects. Note the large number of filling defects all over the colon. They are the small remnants of mucosa which are inflamed and edematous and are surrounded by ulcers. In the contrast study, they appear as radiolucent areas with barium filling the ulcers. Here, note the loss of hostrations and ribbon-like colon up to the middle of the transverse colon. This appearance of the narrow, contracted, ribbon-like colon, which in late stages has a smooth margin, is termed as a lead pipe colon. So the radiological features of ulcerative colitis are mucosal ulcerations with granular mucosal pattern and multiple ulcer niches, pseudopolyposis, and lead pipe colon or a narrow contracted colon with loss of hostrations. Carcinoma of colon. Carcinoma of colon produces two types of pictures on barium study. Number 1, a polypoid mass protruding into the lumen, and number 2, an annular mass producing a narrow stricture. This barium enema study shows an irregular filling defect in the ascending colon. Polypoid and proliferative growths usually produce this type of picture. Another plate of the same patient shows the irregular filling defect in the cecum and ascending colon with shouldering effect at its distal margin shown by the arrow. This is a malignant growth of the ascending colon. The growths in the right colon, that is ascending colon, are usually of this type, and as seen in this case, they grow to large size without producing obstruction. The second type of growth is the annular growth seen in this case. It is seen as an irregular, rigid structure with shouldering on both sides, giving an apple core appearance, like the core and ends of an apple from which the fruit has been eaten. The cavity margins are irregular since the mucosa is destroyed. This is another barium study showing a stricture in the ascending colon with irregular margins and shouldering effect, giving the typical apple core appearance. This is the annular type of carcinoma of colon. This X-ray shows an irregular polypoid filling defect in the ascending colon and the hepatic flexure. This is a polypoid type of carcinoma of colon. So the radiological features of carcinoma of colon are type 1, polypoid with irregular filling defect projecting into the lumen with shouldering, and type 2, annular with a narrow irregular stricture with shouldering on both sides, giving an apple core appearance. Intussusception. Intussusception is invagination of one portion of gut into another immediately distal to it. It is most common in the ileocecal region. Intussusception may sometimes be diagnosed on plain X-ray also. Note here that the right iliac fossa shown by the red arrow is empty. There is no gas shadow there. This is described as an empty quarter sign. Secondly, observe the colonic shadow where the distal end of the intussusception is clearly seen against the colonic gas in the transverse colon distally. This is the head of the bowel that has invaginated inside. Barium enema of the same child shows cupping of the barium head where it meets the intussusception, shown by the horizontal red arrow, also known as the pincer sign, and a thin layer of barium lines the bowel proximal to it, showing circular folds looking like a coiled spring, shown by the vertical white arrow. In a lateral view, the cupping is seen more clearly and the invaginated bowel forms a radiolucent filling defect known as the pincer sign. This is another case of ileocolic intussusception. Note the pincer sign. The head of the barium enema bolus, where it has met the intussusceptum, is cupped and concave. The close-up view shows it better. Note the characteristic shape and the pincer sign. Barium enema can also be used to reduce the intussusception by hydrostatic pressure. These are two X-rays during reduction, and you can see in the X-ray number 2 that the intussusception has reduced from the transverse colon to the ascending colon. This is another case of intussusception. The pincer sign is unmistakable. The intussusceptum is surrounded by a thin layer of barium and its head is in the transverse colon. This is another X-ray showing ileocecal intussusception. Note the shadow of the intussusceptum and the pincer sign or cupping of the barium head. This is another X-ray showing the head of the intussusceptum reaching almost the splenic flexure. So the radiological features of intussusception are: on plain X-ray, empty quarter sign or empty right iliac fossa, and occasionally a soft tissue density showing the mass and its convex distal end. On barium enema, we see pincer sign or cupping of the barium head where it meets the intussusceptum, and coiled spring sign or thin coating of barium surrounding the intussusception resembling a coiled spring. Hirschsprung's disease or primary megacolon. Hirschsprung's disease is characterized by enormous dilatation of the sigmoid and descending colon due to a non-functioning spastic segment at the rectosigmoid junction. This X-ray shows a typical megacolon in a lateral view. Note the grossly dilated pelvic colon. Somewhere near the rectosigmoid junction, it suddenly tapers to a thin spastic segment shown by the red arrow. This is the non-functioning aganglionic segment. Now this is an antero-posterior view of the same patient. The red arrow points to the spastic segment. The spastic segment is devoid of parasympathetic ganglion cells in the Meissner's plexus, so it does not conduct the peristalsis, leading to a functional obstruction. It is usually a 4 to 5 centimeters long segment. In this baby on plain X-ray, the colon is enormously dilated and shows very large air fluid levels. Note the size of the abdomen in relation to the size of the chest. This is a typical picture of congenital or primary megacolon. This X-ray shows a dilated pelvic colon and the cone-shaped narrowing shown by the arrow. It is in front of the sacrum at the rectosigmoid junction. It is the upper limit of the spastic or aganglionic segment. This is termed as a short segment Hirschsprung's disease. Rarely, the aganglionic segment may be longer up to 20 centimeters and, as seen in this X-ray, extend to the ascending colon. But this is a rare case. Note the sawtooth appearance of the aganglionic segment due to multiple ulcerations. This is the lateral view showing the long spastic segment and the ulcerations along the border. Here again we see the common variety of short segment Hirschsprung's disease, where the upper limit of the aganglionic segment is in front of the lower end of sacrum, that is in the rectum. Note the cone-shaped narrowing of the dilated colon followed by a thin spastic segment. In this X-ray, which we saw at the beginning, the spastic segment ends at the sacral promontory, that is at the rectosigmoid junction. This is the commonest variety of megacolon. Note the dilated pelvic colon, the cone-shaped tapering followed by the spastic segment. In this X-ray, there is a hugely dilated pelvic colon which suddenly tapers at the point shown by the white arrow. It is followed by the spastic segment shown by the blue arrow, and then the normal rectum, that is red arrow. The upper end of the spastic segment is a little above the rectosigmoid junction. This is a short segment Hirschsprung's disease. So the radiological features of Hirschsprung's disease are a grossly dilated colon up to the rectosigmoid junction, a funnel-shaped narrowing, and a narrow aganglionic segment. Chronic osteomyelitis. This X-ray shows areas of rarefaction in the lower end of tibia surrounded by some sclerotic changes. This is the first change to be seen on X-ray in chronic osteomyelitis. Note the multiple osteolytic areas and surrounding sclerosis. In the lateral view, observe the periosteum on the front. The periosteum is slightly elevated and new bone formation is seen under it. The inflammatory exudate raises the periosteum, and later new bone starts forming from the raised periosteum. This is a typical picture of chronic osteomyelitis. In this X-ray, almost the whole length of the tibia is infected and shows multiple osteolytic areas. Note the osteolytic areas in the close-up view on the right side. The arrow on the left points to a dense radio-opaque streak, which is the sequestrum. Sequestrum is a densely radio-opaque shadow of a dead piece of bone surrounded by a radiolucent zone which is occupied by the pus and exudate. The new bone formation, indicated by the red arrow, is formed under the raised periosteum and is termed as cloaca. Cloaca has multiple sieve-like openings shown here by the white arrow. The sequestrum is also clearly seen. So chronic osteomyelitis shows the dead bone, that is sequestrum, and new bone, that is cloaca. This is a case of old and healed chronic osteomyelitis. The red arrow points to the cloaca or new bone formation, which is seen distinctly covering the old bone within it, shown by the white arrow. Also, the holes in the cloaca can be appreciated. This X-ray shows a cavity in the bone which is the result of a previous surgery, and within the cavity a dead piece of bone is seen. It is a sequestrum and it is surrounded by radiolucency from all the sides. The radiolucency is because of inflammatory tissue around it. This X-ray shows an area of rarefaction surrounded by sclerosis typical of chronic osteomyelitis. On the left, the patient's leg with the chronic sinus is shown. This is another X-ray showing a typical cavity due to chronic osteomyelitis. The green arrow points to the white sequestrum lying within the cavity. Note the margins around the cavity. There is a significant sclerosis all around and the cortex is thickened opposite it. Now come to the red arrow. Note the periosteal reaction and new bone formation under the raised periosteum. This is a characteristic cavity due to chronic osteomyelitis. Another type of chronic osteomyelitis is a Brodie's abscess. It is usually found in the cancellous tissue near the end of a long bone. Note this oval, well circumscribed, radiolucent area in the upper end of tibia. In the close-up view, there is little sclerosis around it and it does not contain a sequestrum. It may be round or oval and is well circumscribed. Where it is close to the surface, there may be slight periosteal reaction. This is a Brodie's abscess. So the radiological features of chronic osteomyelitis are rarefaction and osteolysis of the affected area of metaphysis surrounded by sclerosis, periosteal elevation with new bone formation, and densely radioopaque sequestrum. The features of Brodie's abscess are a well circumscribed round or oval radiolucent area near the end of a long bone. Some surrounding sclerosis may be present, but there is no sequestrum. It contains only pus. Now we will come to bone tumors. Osteogenic sarcoma. This is an X-ray of the humerus. First note the soft tissue mass around the humerus. The bone shows destruction and there are many osteolytic areas in the lower third of the humerus. There is no clear-cut demarcation from the normal bone, which is a sign of malignant nature of the tumor. Now let us come to the most important feature of this growth, that is new bone formation. Now note in the close-up view that there are bony spicules radiating from the growth outwards into the soft tissue mass, like the sun rays radiating from the sun. This is the classical sun ray appearance, diagnostic of a osteogenic sarcoma. Bone destruction with new bone formation is the feature of osteogenic sarcoma. This is an X-ray of the upper end of tibia. First note the large soft tissue mass on all sides of the bone, suggesting a bone tumor. The bone shows many osteolytic areas, that is, the tumor is destroying the bone. A close inspection of the bone margin shows bony spicules at right angles to the bone radiating into the soft tissue mass. This is the sun ray appearance of a osteogenic sarcoma. Further, at the lower end of the tumor, there is a periosteal reaction in the corner shown by the red arrow. It forms a triangular shadow termed as Codman's triangle. These are the features of osteogenic sarcoma: osteolysis, sun ray appearance, and Codman's triangle. This was osteogenic sarcoma of the upper end of tibia. This is osteogenic sarcoma of the upper end of femur. The original femur is totally destroyed, and apart from the head shown by the white arrow, hardly any normal bone is seen. But we can see a classical sun ray appearance with new bone spicules radiating outwards into the tumor tissue. This is the close-up view of the sun ray appearance with bony spicules radiating out into the soft tissues. Of course, all classical signs may not be seen in every case, especially if it is an early case. This is a tumor of the lower end of femur. Note the soft tissue mass, bony swelling with patchy osteolytic areas. The close-up view shows number 1, osteolytic area, number 2, new bone formation radiating out into the soft tissues. So this is an osteogenic sarcoma. The radiological features of osteogenic sarcoma are bone destruction at the site of the tumor with a wide zone of transition, new bone formation with sun ray appearance due to bone spicules radiating away from the cortex, periosteal reaction at the corner forming Codman's triangle, and the soft tissue swelling. Osteoclastoma or giant cell tumor. This is an X-ray of the lower end of tibia. Note the radiolucent expansion of the bone with the thinning of the cortex. The red arrow points to the thinned out cortex. There is no periosteal elevation or periosteal reaction and no extension into the soft tissues. There are thin septa within the tumor, giving it a soap bubble appearance. And there may be pathological fractures of the thinned cortex as shown by the red arrow. This is an osteoclastoma or giant cell tumor of the lower end of tibia. This is an osteoclastoma of the mandible. Compare the left ramus and the right ramus. Note the radiolucent bony expansion with thinned out cortex. A very classical soap bubble appearance is seen in this close-up view. Compare it with the soap bubbles in the upper right-hand corner. In a lateral view, the soap bubble appearance is seen even better. The thin bony septae surrounding rounded areas of radiolucency. This is an osteoclastoma of the mandible. This is an osteoclastoma of the lower end of radius. Note the radiolucent bony expansion with the soap bubble appearance. But here the cortex is broken and dissolved, and it is spreading into the soft tissues. It is also extending into the wrist joint. These are signs of malignant transformation of a osteoclastoma. So the radiological features of osteoclastoma are: 1. Radiolucent expansion at the end of a long bone with thinning of the expanded cortex and hazy zone of transition. Number 2. Soap bubble appearance. Number 3. No periosteal reaction. And number 4. There may be pathological fractures. The signs of malignant transformation are a break in the continuity of the cortex, extension into the joint, and soft tissue involvement. Ewing's tumor. In this X-ray, we see a tumor in the shaft of the fibula, that is, in the diaphysis. On close observation, we can see that the bone shows areas of osteolysis, while the periosteal bone deposition has occurred in layers, giving a typical onion peel appearance. Note the cut surface of an onion and note the similarity with the layered bone formation. This is an Ewing's sarcoma with onion peel appearance. Watch again in a close-up view the typical onion peel appearance. A diffuse bone formation may also be seen in the soft tissues. This is another X-ray of the shaft or a diaphysis of the femur. The close-up view shows a typical onion peel appearance. The layered bone formation is the characteristic of a Ewing's sarcoma. There are a few mottled areas of osteolysis in the bone shaft. And at the point where the arrow now points, the periosteal reaction resembles an osteogenic sarcoma. Remember that onion peel appearance may not be seen everywhere. So the radiological features of Ewing's tumor are lamellated periosteal reaction giving an onion peel appearance, osteolysis in the main bone, that is diaphysis, and zone of transition between it and the normal bone is large. Osteochondroma or exostosis. This X-ray shows a bony exostosis of the upper end of tibia. It is an outgrowth from the shaft of the tibia. It has a narrow base as shown by the red arrow, and it then expands like a mushroom near its apex. It is directed away from the knee joint, which is its nearest joint. This is a benign bone tumor, an osteochondroma or exostosis. The surface of the tumor is smooth as it is covered by cartilage. So the radiological features of a osteochondroma or exostosis are a bony outgrowth from the diaphysis of long bones but close to a joint. It is covered by cartilage cap and has a smooth head, and it is directed away from the nearest joint. Multiple myeloma. This is an X-ray of the skull showing multiple small round osteolytic areas. This is a characteristic appearance of multiple myeloma. The holes are perfectly round as if punched out, and there is no surrounding sclerosis as seen in osteomyelitis. This is a lateral view showing the typical punched out appearance. The holes are 2 to 5 millimeters in size but may join together to form larger ones. The humerus also shows the osteolytic lesions. This is multiple myeloma. This is X-ray skull of another patient showing similar punched out osteolytic areas. Note the circular black areas with sharp borders and no surrounding sclerosis. This is a lateral view of the skull showing the same lesions. And here we see them in the humerus, clavicle and ribs. So the radiological features of multiple myeloma are multiple small osteolytic lesions 2 to 5 millimeters in size, no surrounding sclerosis, and they are seen mainly in the skull, mandible, ribs, vertebrae and pelvis. Bony metastasis. All malignant tumors may spread via the blood to the bones and develop bony metastasis, the commonest being from the prostate, breast, kidneys and lungs. The bony metastases are of two types. Majority are osteolytic, destroying the bone, and some are osteoblastic, forming dense new bone. This is an X-ray of the right humerus showing an osteolytic lesion in the midshaft. Its border is ill-defined. There is no surrounding sclerosis or periosteal reaction. It is a purely destructive lesion. This is a typical osteolytic secondary in the right humerus. The osteolytic secondaries, being destructive lesions, weaken the bone which may fracture with trivial trauma. This X-ray shows a osteolytic lesion in the middle of the right femur without any surrounding sclerosis or periosteal reaction. The bone is fractured at the site of the lesion. This is a pathological fracture due to a osteolytic secondary in the femur. Note the purely destructive nature of the lesion without any reaction. This was a metastasis from a bronchogenic carcinoma. This X-ray of the pelvis and the lumbar spine shows dense radio-opaque deposits at multiple sites. This is a typical appearance of secondaries from carcinoma of prostate in an elderly male patient. This is a close-up view of the spine and of the pelvis showing densely radio-opaque shadows. On lateral X-ray, note the density in the first lumbar vertebra and in the fourth lumbar vertebra. These are osteoblastic metastases from carcinoma of prostate. This is another case of carcinoma of prostate whose X-ray shows dense radio-opaque deposits or osteoblastic metastasis. In close-up view, note the patchy radiodense opacities. Such osteoblastic opacities are common from prostatic carcinoma in males and breast carcinoma in females. Other possible sites are ovaries, stomach and carcinoid tumors. Now we will come to deficiency disorders of the bones. Rickets. First, let us study the normal anatomy of the growing end of a long bone. The oval structure at the end is epiphysis or the growing center. It is separated from the main bone by a radiolucent gap which represents the growth plate. The edge of the metaphysis shows a white line of calcification termed as the zone of provisional calcification, and the portion of the bone beneath it is the metaphysis. In rickets, the early changes to occur are an increase in the distance between the epiphysis and metaphysis, that is widening of the growth plate, and loss of zone of provisional calcification, so the calcified end margin of the metaphysis becomes blurred and is termed as fraying. Later, the soft end of the metaphysis with stress becomes wider and concave, termed as splaying and cupping respectively. In long-standing cases, the bone density is reduced and bowing of the leg bones may occur. This is an X-ray of the wrists of a child with rickets. The wide and cup-shaped metaphysis can be identified from a distance, and note the soft tissue widening caused by the widened metaphysis. Now here, note the increased distance between the epiphysis and metaphysis, shown by the blue arrow. This is a widening of the growth plate. The margin of the metaphysis is blurred and frayed, that is, the line of provisional calcification is disturbed. The metaphysis is widened and its end is concave. The arrow shows the increased concavity of the metaphysis in the ulna, termed as cupping. In the lateral view, the fraying of the zone of provisional calcification is seen nicely. So also the splaying of the metaphysis with bowing. In this X-ray of the wrist, the red arrow points to the fraying of the zone of provisional calcification and the blue arrow shows the concavity or cupping. Note the cupping in lateral view. If you note carefully, there is calcification in the metaphyseal margin and the growth plate is normal. This is because the child has already received treatment. This is healing rickets. The chest X-ray of the same patient shows another feature of rickets, that is widening of the anterior ends of the ribs. Note the widened rib ends seen clinically as a rickety rosary. This is an 8-year-old child with renal rickets. The wrist shows a wide growth plate. Zone of provisional calcification is frayed and thinned. The metaphysis is wide and cupped, that is splaying of the metaphysis is seen. The tibia also shows fraying of the metaphyseal border and widening and splaying of the metaphysis. The changes are better seen in the wrist if the child is crawling and in the knee if the child is walking. This is a child with active rickets. Note that the zone of provisional calcification is completely rarefied and hardly seen at all. In the lateral view, the widening and cupping of the metaphysis is seen. So the radiological features of rickets are loss of zone of provisional calcification with fraying of the metaphysis, that is the margin of the metaphysis becomes blurred and indistinct. Number 2, the growth plate widens, increasing the distance between the epiphysis and metaphysis. Number 3, the metaphysis becomes wide, termed as splaying of the metaphysis. It also becomes concave or cupped with spurs at the margin. And in late stages, there is bowing of the diaphysis, that is bending of the shafts of long bones. Scurvy. This is the normal end of a growing bone with epiphysis, growth plate, and zone of provisional calcification and metastasis. In scurvy, the cortex becomes thinned with ground glass appearance of the shaft due to loss of trabeculae. The epiphysis is smaller with thin penciled cortex and osteopenic bone. This is termed as Wimberger sign. The zone of provisional calcification becomes dense and is termed as the white line of Frankel. Just below it is a radiolucent zone called as the zone of Trummerfield. The margins of the metaphysis may show spurs due to marginal fractures termed as Pelkan spurs. Later, there may be subperiosteal hemorrhages with periosteal reaction and sometimes large subperiosteal hematomas which get calcified. In this X-ray, note the large calcified subperiosteal hematomas around the femurs. The left femur shows periosteal reaction. This is a typical lesion of scurvy. Now we will study the bone end. The epiphysis is very small, osteopenic with thin cortex. This is the Wimberger sign. We do not see the dense zone of provisional calcification or the white line of Frankel, probably because the child has received some treatment, but the radiolucent zone of Trummerfield shown by the arrow is present. Now note the large subperiosteal hematoma which is calcified. Such advanced lesions are a rarity today. The left femur also shows periosteal reaction which is due to subperiosteal hemorrhages. So the radiological features of scurvy are a penciled cortex and ground glass appearance of the shaft due to loss of trabeculae. The zone of provisional calcification becomes dense, that is white line of Frankel. Just below it is a radiolucent zone or the zone of Trummerfield with spur formation at the margins called Pelkan spurs. The epiphyses are small osteophenic with penciled cortex termed as Wimberger's sign, and there are subperiosteal hemorrhages with calcification. Paget's disease. This pelvis shows multiple sclerotic areas. But in contrast with the osteoblastic metastasis of carcinoma of prostate, this is a combination of sclerotic and osteolytic areas. Secondly, there is thickening of the cortex, best seen at the pelvic rim. Note the dense white pelvic rim shown by the arrow. The trabeculae are very coarse, but that is not apparent on the TV screen. So the features of Paget's disease are thickening of cortex and a mixture of sclerotic and osteolytic areas. The pelvis is the most common site of Paget's disease, the next being the skull. This X-ray of the skull shows a mixture of sclerotic and osteolytic areas. This is Paget's disease. In close-up view, note the thickened skull bone shown by the arrow and the mixture of sclerotic and a few osteolytic areas. However, in spite of thickening of the bone cortex, the bone does not gain in strength. On the contrary, it becomes fragile and brittle. This patient has come with a fracture of the neck of the femur. Note the thickened cortex which is fractured. Charcot's joints. Note the gross disorganization of this elbow joint, which clinically was painless and showed abnormal mobility. This is a neuropathic joint or Charcot's joint. Both the bones show new bone formation outside their border, which is a fracture callus and fragments due to repeated injury. There is increased bone density in both the bones, which is the characteristic of Charcot's joints. The elbows are affected in syringomyelia, while the knees are affected in diabetic neuropathies. This was a Charcot's elbow. Now we will come to the section of individual X-rays and start with the X-ray of the knee. This X-ray of the right knee shows reduced joint space shown by the red arrow. Cartilage destruction and reduced joint space is the most important X-ray feature of osteoarthritis. The cartilage destruction is usually more on the medial side. Note that the joint space is more reduced on the medial side. Fibula marks the lateral side. The next important feature is development of osteophytes at the bone corners. Note the small osteophytes shown by the green arrow. The patella may also show osteophytes at its superior and inferior border in the lateral view. Now note the red arrow pointing to a rounded radio opacity lying within the joint cavity. It is termed as a loose body. It may change its position in different X-rays. Sometimes the patient may have a effusion. The joint space is then increased or normal, and a soft tissue swelling is seen around the joint. In a lateral view, the patella is separated from the femur by more distance, as shown by the arrow. This X-ray of the knee showed marked reduction in the joint space, more so on the medial side. Also note the osteophytes at the bone margins. The lateral view shows osteophytes at the posterior-superior and posterior-inferior margins of the patella. And in this view, a loose body is seen in the joint, shown by the red arrow. This is osteoarthritis of the knee. This is an advanced stage of the disease with deformity. The leg, that is the tibia, is angulated laterally. This is genu valgum, a lateral angulation of the tibia on femur. Note the destruction of the joint space, which may later lead to bony ankylosis. In this X-ray, the tibia is angulated medially over the femur. This is genu varum. So the radiological features of osteoarthritis of the knee are a reduction in the joint space due to cartilage destruction, more on the medial side, osteophyte formation in the tibia, less commonly femur and patella, formation of radio-opaque loose bodies in the joint, and deformity, more commonly genu valgum. X-ray of the cervical spine. Cervical spondylitis. This is an X-ray of the cervical spine lateral view. The white arrow points to the first cervical vertebra. The second vertebral body has the dens projecting upwards. This helps us to count the vertebrae from above downwards. Now note the red arrow pointing to the space between the fifth and the sixth cervical vertebra. The reduction in the joint space compared to the other intervertebral spaces is the first hallmark of cervical spondylitis. Now note the small osteophytes of the vertebral bodies at the same site anteriorly. Osteophyte formation is the second feature. Such osteophytes posteriorly will compress on the nerve roots and give rise to radiating shooting pains. This is cervical spondylitis. This is another X-ray showing cervical spondylitis. Note the marked reduction of the joint space between the fourth and the fifth cervical vertebrae. There are large anterior osteophytes. They look like the beak of a bird. This is termed as beaking of the vertebrae. Also note that the anterior convexity of the cervical spine is reduced and it is straightened due to the spasm of the paraspinal muscles. This is a typical picture of cervical spondylitis. This is cervical spondylitis affecting two spaces, the space between the fifth and the sixth and the seventh cervical vertebrae is reduced. There are small osteophytes arising from all the three vertebrae and convex anterior curvature is reduced. The cervical column is straight in the affected area. This is cervical spondylitis. So the radiological features of cervical spondylitis are straightening of the forward convexity of the cervical vertebral column, reduction in the disc space, and osteophyte formation at the vertebral body margins. Cervical rib. In this X-ray, note the well-developed cervical rib shown by the arrow. Now how to identify whether it is a cervical rib or the first rib? For this, trace the rib backwards and see where it articulates. The transverse process of T1 slants upwards, while the transverse process of C7 slants downwards. This is articulating with C7, so this is a cervical rib. Note this bilateral cervical rib. It is thin and incomplete on the left side, but well developed on the right side. At its posterior end, note that it articulates with the transverse process which is slanting downwards. So this is cervical rib. In this X-ray, observe the right C7 transverse process carefully. You can see a rudimentary cervical rib attached to it. The rudimentary rib may continue forwards as a fibrous band which is not seen radiologically but is important clinically. This X-ray shows bilateral cervical ribs shown by the arrows. On the right side, the rib is well developed, while on the left side, it is small. In the close-up view, note that the rib articulates with the transverse process which is slanting downwards. To conclude, whenever apical regions of the lungs look asymmetrical, look carefully for a cervical rib. So also, when the patient has pains radiating from the neck to the arms, a cervical rib, even if very small and rudimentary, should be looked for. Trace the rib backwards and confirm that it articulates with the transverse process which slants downwards, and only then label it as a cervical rib. Tuberculosis of the cervical spine. In this X-ray of the spine, note the reduced space between the sixth and the seventh cervical vertebrae. On closer inspection, you can see the destruction of the margins of the vertebrae, especially the superior margin of the lower, that is seventh cervical vertebra. This is a typical appearance of tuberculosis of spine. On antero-posterior view, a round paravertebral shadow of a cold abscess is seen, which is also typical. The details of tuberculosis of spine will be explained with the lumbar spine. A lesion higher up may present as a retropharyngeal abscess. In this X-ray, Note the distance between the cervical spine and the radiolucent shadow of air in the trachea and pharynx. The distance is increased and is occupied by a soft tissue shadow. This is a typical picture of a retropharyngeal abscess, the commonest cause for which is tuberculosis of spine. Now note the reduced space between C4 and C5. The anterosuperior lip of C5 shows destruction. This is tuberculosis of cervical spine at C4-5 level with a retropharyngeal abscess. Fracture dislocation of the cervical spine. Note the anterior dislocation of the fifth cervical vertebra over the sixth, in this case of traumatic quadriplegia after a fall from height. A close inspection shows no fracture of the vertebral bodies, but there is a dislocation. This X-ray shows a fracture dislocation of the second and third cervical vertebrae. A close-up view shows the fracture of the spine of the second cervical vertebra and anterior dislocation of its body over the third cervical vertebra. This is a fracture dislocation of C2-3. Now we will come to the thoracolumbar spine. Tuberculosis of spine. Tuberculosis in spine is primarily a destructive lesion, and almost always it affects two adjacent vertebrae and the intervening intervertebral disc. Here it is affecting the third and the fourth lumbar vertebrae. Note the reduction of joint space with destruction of the anterosuperior aspect of the lower vertebra. This is a typical early lesion involving anterior part of the vertebral body adjacent to the upper or lower articular surface. This is another early lesion showing a reduction in the intervertebral disc space between the second and third lumbar vertebrae and irregularity of the margins of the vertebrae. Sclerotic reaction is usually minimal or absent in tuberculosis. Note the irregular margin and reduced disc space. This X-ray shows reduced joint space between the fourth and the fifth lumbar vertebrae, but no destruction of the body or articular surfaces. But in the anteroposterior view, destruction of the left corners shown by the black arrow points to the diagnosis of tuberculosis. The rounded protruding corners as seen on the right in front of the red arrow are missing on the left side. In a later stage, the disease spreads in the vertebral body, causing destruction and collapse of the vertebral body. The disease is always more extensive in the anterior part of the body and results in anterior wedging and gibbous formation. Note the destruction of the body of the second lumbar vertebra with reduction of the L2-3 joint space. Note this young man with a gibbous of the thoracic spine and a walking stick in his hand. The X-ray shows destruction of the 7th and 8th thoracic vertebrae with anterior wedging. Note the extensive destruction of the vertebral bodies, that the two vertebrae appear as one. This is a typical lesion of tuberculosis of spine. The next characteristic feature of tuberculosis of spine is a cold abscess. The paraspinal abscess casts a soft tissue shadow with convex lateral margins in the thoracic region. This is described as a bird's nest appearance, akin to this bird's nest seen in the side picture. Note in the close-up view the bone destruction and reduced joint space shown by the red arrow. This is another patient with a gibbous. A lateral X-ray shows destruction of T8-9 with destruction of the disc space. A faint soft tissue shadow shown by the red arrow in front of the vertebrae suggests a cold abscess. AP view shows the typical paraspinal abscess with convex lateral margins giving a bird's nest appearance. Now this is a case of healed tuberculosis of spine after treatment. The two collapsed vertebrae are totally fused and appear as one. Note the bony fusion and some sclerosis. Counting of the posterior pedicles shows that there are actually two vertebrae fused into one. The AP view shows organized and calcified cold abscess with convex lateral border. So the radiological features of tuberculosis of spine are a reduction in the disc space with erosion of the anterior corners of the adjacent vertebrae, that is antero-inferior corner of the upper vertebra and antero-superior corner of the lower vertebra. The adjacent margins of the disc interface are irregular. Then there is collapse of the vertebral body with anterior wedging and kyphosis, and a pre or paravertebral soft tissue shadow is seen if cold abscess is formed. Compression fracture of the spine. This is an X-ray of the lumbar spine of a patient who had fallen from height. Note the compression fracture of the second lumbar vertebra. The important feature to note is that the adjacent disc spaces are normal and adjacent vertebrae, that is L1 and L2, are also normal. Only the second lumbar vertebral body is collapsed. The second important thing to note is that there is no osteoporosis. So this is a traumatic compression fracture of L2. This is another X-ray showing a compression fracture of T12. The disc spaces above and below the vertebra are normal. The adjacent vertebrae show no destruction. So this is a compression fracture. But the spine is osteoporotic. Osteoporosis is the predisposing factor for this fracture, which occurred after a trivial fall. So the radiological features of a compression fracture of spine are compression of one vertebral body without osteoporosis and normal disc space above and below. Osteoporosis of the spine. In this X-ray, note the gross reduction of bone density, that is osteoporosis. This has resulted in multiple fractures of the spine involving T12, L1, L2 and L3. Due to the decrease in bone density, there is a relative prominence of the thin cortex. While osteoporosis is a deficiency of ossification, osteomalacia occurs due to deficiency of vitamin D in a mature skeleton. In the vertebral column, the bone density is reduced with thin cortex and the vertebral bodies become biconcave with unusually large and biconvex intervertebral disc. This is described as a codfish vertebra. Note the small and biconcave vertebral bodies and unusually large and biconvex intervertebral discs. This is another X-ray of spine showing osteoporosis. The bone density is reduced, the shape of the vertebrae is unaltered, and the intervertebral discs are normal. The cortex appears relatively prominent though it is thin. This is osteoporosis. So the radiological features of osteoporosis are osteopenia or decrease in the bone density with loss of trabeculae. There is a relative prominence of the thin cortex and compression fractures are common. In osteomalacia, due to vitamin D deficiency, the bone density is decreased. The vertebral bodies are biconcave with large biconvex intervertebral discs described as codfish vertebrae. Osteoarthritis of the spine. The changes of osteoarthritis are similar to what we saw in cervical spondylitis. The vertebral bodies show osteophytes at the margins and some disc spaces may be reduced due to degenerative changes in the intervertebral discs. Note the prominent osteophytes in the lateral and AP views. This is osteoarthritis of the lumbar spine. This is another X-ray showing typical changes of osteoarthritis. The vertical arrow anteriorly points to a large osteophyte and the horizontal arrow posteriorly points to a reduced joint space. Even the L5S1 space is reduced. This is osteoarthritis of the lumbar spine. So the features of osteoarthritis on X-ray are reduction in intervertebral space due to cartilage and disc degeneration, osteophyte formation at the joint margins, and sclerosis of opposing margins of adjacent vertebrae. Ankylosing spondylitis. This X-ray shows a typical lumbar spine in early phase of ankylosing spondylitis. The vertebrae are square with loss of superior and inferior lips of the vertebral bodies, and then the interspinous ligaments are calcified. Here you see the calcification of the anterior spinal ligament. This is the beginning of the formation of a bamboo spine. The earliest changes, of course, are seen in the sacroiliac joints. In the same patient, the sacroiliac joints are totally fused. There is no demarcation of the joint left. There is bony ankylosis. This X-ray shows a typical bamboo spine. We will have a closer look. The vertebrae are square and all the ligaments are calcified, making it a single long block of bone. The calcified intervertebral discs with vertebral borders give a look of the nodes of a bamboo. Note the calcified intervertebral discs. This is another X-ray showing a bamboo spine. Note the continuous line of ossification along the anterior border. The vertebrae are square in shape with loss of the lips at superior and inferior borders. This is a typical picture of ankylosing spondylitis. So the radiological features of ankylosing spondylitis are: in the sacroiliac joint, irregular joint margin and sclerosis, reduced joint width and later bony ankylosis. In the vertebral column, there is squaring of the bodies due to erosion of anterosuperior lips, thin elongated osteophytes due to calcification of ligaments or syndesmophytes, disc calcification, and in late stage bamboo spine with bony ankylosis of all the joints, that is discovertebral, facet joints and costovertebral joints. Spondylolisthesis. Spondylolisthesis is a forward slipping of a vertebra over the vertebra below it. It is most common at L5-S1 and L4-5 sites. This X-ray shows spondylolisthesis at the L5-S1 level. The fifth lumbar vertebra has slipped forwards by more than 1 centimeter over the first sacral vertebra. This produces a step in the spinal canal, and by stretching the spinal roots produces backache and root pains. This X-ray shows spondylolisthesis at L4-5 level. Note the forward movement of the fourth lumbar vertebra over the fifth. To detect a small spondylolisthesis, we must trace the posterior border of the vertebral bodies and look for a break in the continuity. This is a spondylolisthesis at L3-4. This is a less common site for spondylolisthesis. L5-S1 is the commonest site. Disc prolapse. In this X-ray, the space between third and fourth lumbar vertebrae is reduced. There are osteophytes on L3-4 suggesting osteoarthritis. Whenever the intervertebral space is reduced, a disc prolapse must be considered as a differential diagnosis. But a definitive diagnosis of a disc prolapse cannot be made on plain X-ray. If the clinical situation demands, a myelogram or MRI scan should be done to confirm a disc prolapse and decide about surgery. In this patient with spina bifida occulta with a tuft of hair over the back, the X-ray shows that the posterior spinous processes of L4 and L5 are bifid and split. This X-ray shows a larger defect. Observe the fourth lumbar vertebra. Not only the spinous process, but the pedicles are also widely separated, creating a wide bony defect on the posterior aspect. This is spina bifida. Myelography, or the contrast study of the spinal canal. This myelogram shows an indentation on the spinal canal at L4-5. This is a typical picture of intervertebral disc prolapse. In the AP view, there is a narrowing of the canal at the same point. This is L4-5 disc prolapse. This is another case of disc prolapse. There is a complete block at L4-5 level with no dye reaching below it. A lateral view shows a convex protrusion between L4-5 suggesting an intervertebral disc prolapse. This myelogram shows severe constrictions at multiple levels with total obstruction at L4-5. This condition is termed as spinal canal stenosis. This myelogram shows a intradural intramedullary lesion. There is widening of the cord shadow seen within the contrast, and the filling defect is central without widening of the contrast. This is another myelogram showing a intradural spinal tumor with total block. Note the irregular convex edge and the central block. Fractures. Fracture is a break in the continuity of a bone and usually follows a trauma. A fracture may be simple or comminuted. In simple fracture, the bone is broken into two pieces, while in comminuted fracture, the bone is broken in many pieces. A simple fracture may be transverse, oblique or spiral, and in children, only one side of the cortex may be fractured, like the green stem of a plant termed as a green stick fracture. If a fracture hematoma communicates to the outside through an open wound, it is termed as a compound fracture. And if a fracture occurs in a deceased bone, it is termed as a pathological fracture. Now we will see the types of fractures. This is a transverse fracture. This is an oblique fracture. This is a spiral fracture. This is a green stick fracture where only one side cortex is fractured. This is a comminuted fracture with more than two fragments, and this is a pathological fracture in a deceased bone. Now we will see some common fractures. This is a fracture of the lateral third of the left clavicle. This is a fracture of the middle third of the right clavicle. This is a fracture of the scapula. This is a typical anterior dislocation of the right shoulder. This is a fracture of the neck of the right humerus. This is a fracture of the shaft of the humerus. This is a condylar fracture of the right humerus in an adult. This is a supracondylar fracture of the humerus in a child. This is another supracondylar fracture. Note the anterior projection of the upper fragment. This is a medial condylar fracture of the humerus. This is an elbow dislocation. This is a fracture of the lower third of radius and ulna. This is a fracture at the junction of lower third and middle third of radius ulna. This is a fracture of the middle third of radius ulna. This is a typical cholesis fracture of the lower end of radius with dorsal angulation. This is a transverse fracture of the middle phalanx of finger. This is a transverse undisplaced fracture of a middle phalanx of finger. This is a dislocation of proximal interphalangeal joint of a finger. This is a fracture of the pelvis involving both pubic rami. This is a fracture of the neck of the left femur. It is transcervical, not involving the trochanters. This is an intertrochanteric type of fracture of the neck of left femur. Note the fractured trochanters. This is another intertrochanteric fracture of the neck of the femur. It is comminuted. This is a spiral fracture of the shaft of the femur in upper third. This is a fracture of the patella with widely separated lower pole. This is a fracture of the tibia fibula in the upper third. This is a comminuted fracture of the tibia fibula in the lower third. This is an undisplaced fracture of the lower third of tibia. And this is an oblique fracture of the shaft of the fifth metatarsal. Now we will study the X-rays of the skull. Fracture lines on a skull have to be differentiated from the normal suture lines between the skull bones and also from the normal vascular markings. A fracture line is seen as a narrow dark line. The suture lines are wavy and have a fixed anatomical location and direction. Vascular markings are faint, smooth, and if traced towards the vertex, they branch out. In contrast, a fracture line is a straight, dark line anywhere on the skull. This is a crack fracture in the occipital region. This X-ray shows a temporoparietal crack fracture seen as a narrow, dark line. The vascular markings are faint and smoothly curved, while the fracture lines are dark, straight, and do not conform to the suture lines. There are two types of fractures in the skull: crack fractures, which we have just seen, and depressed fractures, where a fragment of the skull bone is depressed into the cranial cavity and presses upon the brain tissue. This X-ray shows a depressed fracture of the skull in the occipital region. Note the depressed fragment in the lateral view. In close-up view, the fragment is seen about 1 centimeter inside the cranial cavity. This is a depressed fracture of the skull. In children, the bone is soft and may get depressed like a ping pong ball. Note the convex depression in this skull without an actual fracture. This is called a closed pond depressed fracture, where the bone and the dura are intact. The fractures of the base of the skull require special views to demonstrate them. Now we will study the skull in other diseases. In multiple myeloma, the skull shows characteristic radiolucent circular shadows 2 to 5 millimeters in size, as if multiple holes are punched out in the skull. This is a typical appearance of skull in multiple myeloma. In Paget's disease, there is a thickening of the vault and multiple areas of dense white sclerosis with few areas of radiolucency. This is a skull X-ray in Paget's disease. In hydrocephalus in infants, there is a large skull with thinning of the cortex and wide separation of the cranial sutures. Note the large size of the head, thin skull, and wide sutures. But in older children, where sutures are fused, the skull cannot expand in size. Then there is a characteristic beaten silver appearance. This beaten silver appearance is suggestive of a long-standing raised intracranial tension. This is another X-ray showing a beaten silver appearance shown by the arrow and a wide suture line shown by the star. Note the thin skull with beaten silver appearance and the wide suture line. X-ray of the paranasal sinuses. The paranasal sinuses are studied in two views, Waters' view and the posterior-anterior or Caldwell's view. Look for haziness of the sinuses, fluid level, and destruction of the sinus walls. This is a Waters' view of the paranasal sinuses. Note the haziness in the right maxillary sinus as compared to the left. This is right maxillary sinusitis. This is a Caldwell view of the paranasal sinuses showing haziness of the left maxillary sinus. Now observe the space between the two orbits occupied by ethmoidal sinuses. The left ethmoidal sinuses are also hazy. So this is left maxillary and ethmoidal sinusitis. This is a Waters' view showing haziness of the maxillary sinus. Haziness is always appreciated in comparison with the opposite normal sinus. A normal sinus casts a radiolucent shadow due to the presence of air in it. This X-ray shows haziness of the left maxillary sinus. A close observation shows a fluid level due to collection of fluid or pus in the sinus. This is left maxillary sinusitis with fluid level. This X-ray shows a uniform haziness of the right maxilla. Now compare it with the normal side and pay attention to the lateral wall of the maxillary sinus. On the right side, the lateral wall is missing. Destruction of the bony walls is a sign of malignancy. This is a case of CA maxilla. On comparison, destruction of the orbital floor can also be appreciated. This is another patient of CA maxilla. Note the opacity of the right maxilla compared to the left. And now note the destruction of the lateral wall. The lateral wall seen clearly on the left side is missing on the right. This is CA maxilla. Dental and mandible X-rays. In the evaluation of a painful tooth, X-ray of the tooth with its root is very important to detect the infection of the root and the surrounding bone. Root abscess is an osteolytic lesion around the root of a tooth. The red arrow points to the circular area of bone destruction around the root of this tooth, and the white arrow points to the caries with destruction of the crown of the tooth, forming a radiolucent cavity within the tooth. This is another X-ray showing a carious tooth with a root abscess. The red arrow points to the bone destruction due to osteomyelitis surrounding the root, that is root abscess, and the white arrow points to the carious cavity within the tooth. A white line of dense bone lining the socket, separated from the root by a narrow radiolucent zone of periodontal membrane, is termed as lamina dura. Destruction of the lamina dura is the earliest evidence of a root abscess. Later, the surrounding alveolar bone will also be destroyed. Impacted third molar. This X-ray shows another common cause of tooth pain, that is an impacted third molar. The third molar tooth is erupting in a transverse direction and has got impacted with the second molar. An impacted third molar is extremely prone to infections and may show a cavity or a root abscess. This is a pan-orthotomograph. This is a special X-ray showing all the upper and lower teeth in a single panoramic view. Dental cyst. A carious mature tooth may develop a cystic swelling at its root called dental cyst. Note the large osteolytic area with smooth and thin border in this X-ray. It expands the bone and cortex becomes thin. As compared to a dentigerous cyst, it does not contain a tooth. This is another X-ray showing a dental cyst in relation to a root. It is a radiolucent shadow with a thin cortex. The lamina dura, that is the dense white bony line, is broken at the tip of the root. The cavity does not contain a tooth. This is a dental cyst. Dentigerous cyst. This X-ray shows a radiolucent cavity in the mandible, and the vertical arrow points to an unerupted tooth in the cavity. A cyst forming around an unerupted tooth is termed as a dentigerous cyst. It is more common in the maxilla, that is upper teeth, and in the third molars. This X-ray shows a dentigerous cyst in the maxilla. Note the large radiolucent cyst. The red arrow points to an unerupted mature tooth. This is a typical dentigerous cyst with an adult tooth inside it. This is another dentigerous cyst in the mandible, showing an unerupted incisor inside the cyst. In the lateral view, note the bone expansion, thinning of the cortex, and the adult tooth inside the cyst. Mandibular tumors. This is an osteoclastoma or adamantinoma of the mandible. Note the osteolytic areas with thin septae giving a typical soap bubble appearance. This is a lateral view showing the thinned out cortex and the soap bubble appearance. In carcinoma of the mandible is destroyed and the affected areas shows complete osteolysis. This X-ray shows the destruction of the ramus of the mandible. The tooth in the tumor tissue looks as if it is hanging in the air. This is carcinoma of the mandible. This is another X-ray showing complete destruction of the left mandibular ramus in a case of carcinoma of mandible. The left ramus is destroyed and few specks of calcification are seen here and there. All the teeth in the affected area have fallen off. This is carcinoma of the mandible.